Well, this is quite a mouthful, Vibrio parahemolyticus. It's one species of Vibrio that has only emerged in the last, recently within the last 2 or 3 years here in Nova Scotia, but it has a history of globally. It's found all over the world. It's found in Australia. It's found in Asia. It's found in Europe. So it's not a very isolated type of. It's a gram-negative bacteria that lives in oysters and causes. Thankfully, to this point, this specific species very rarely causes death, but it does cause a lot of discomfort, dysentery, and vomiting, and that sort of thing. But the Vibrios, I've known them in a lot of other capacities as a finfish farmer, because Vibrio is a real threat to the finfish industry. But we also have Vibrios that cause cholera. Now, when everybody knows about cholera, it's killed thousands and thousands of people around the world. So it always sets off an alarm bell. But this particular species, although CFIA seemed to indicate that it's really only been around recently, in recent years, but I think their memory may be a little bit short, because in 1975, 76, we were holding oysters in Seal Island. We'd bought from fishermen, and we'd sent them in, and there was some Vibrio found in those oysters, but at those times we weren't harvesting in the summertime, so we just left them on the tray storage. So that's so yes, they're found worldwide, globally. Only relatively recently they've been found here in Canada in terms of having any impact. And I think a lot of this is due to the fact that generally the oyster industry has been, certainly in PEI and in Nova Scotia, up until this point, has been based on harvesting only in the fall months when the temperatures were cooler. Most oyster fishermen never even really started until October. And in the case of in Dunk River, when they have the relay fishery in the spring, they'd be out there busy harvesting all their contaminated stock, and then they'd relay them to the other side of the island to clean the oysters up. But those oysters were placed in the old days. They just put them on. They planted them on the bottom. They didn't put them in containers, but they weren't touched until the fall. So there was a large gap period of time in which even if the Vibrio was there, and I don't think it was really monitored in those days. They were monitoring mainly for fecal coliforms, but I suspect, although well, I guess we'll never know for sure, that it may have been present anyway, because it is a global phenomenon. It's everywhere, and it's generally much more common where we have water temperatures that are warmer. So it's the key to this beast is that it lives and thrives in water above 15 degrees Celsius. So if you're down below 10 degrees Celsius, it's very rarely seen. It's not non-existent, it's just they can't locate it. They say that that it lives in the sediments, so it can winter in the sediments. So I guess that's it doesn't, or if it's not in the animal itself. That other Vibrio you see on the screen there, Vibrio vulnificus, that's one you hear a lot down in the Gulf of Mexico and places like that, where people they have a serious problem with deaths with that particular species. Luckily we haven't seen that one turn up, so we don't want to. Although what Jeff was telling us about invasives and changing environments, we may see new arrivals turning up. So 2015 was the last. This is the last time, the first time it was seen, picked up by CFIA at some oysters at the Fisherman's Market in Halifax.
So is that vulnificus? Is that just because in the Caribbean, it's just the water temperatures are so high.
It's so high. Yeah, I think it seems to be related to the fact that, yeah, they have year-round warmer water temperatures. I think it's going to be a while before we encounter that. But it also doesn't seem to turn up in the open ocean. It only seems to be in brackish water, and which is unfortunately where most of our oysters are located, in the coastal zone. So the 15-degree, this is the if there's any sort of alert what one should have as an oyster farmer is 15 degrees. That's when you have to send now. If you're going to be selling any oysters, and this is the key to it, if you're not selling oysters in the warm months, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you have a summer marketing permit and you're going to be selling in temperature regimes over 15 degrees, they want to know at least 14 days before you're going to sell. They want a sample sent in, 60 oyster sample, and it's sent to the lab in the only lab that they recognize is in PEI right now that's acknowledged to do it. And I've got the name mentioned here a little later, but they're trying to get other labs involved. It's an expensive proposition for a farmer to do. Just the entire process, you have to monitor water temperatures. It's crucial that you monitor the water temperatures from start to finish. From the time they get out of the water, you should have you have to have the water temperatures. You have to monitor the temperature of the oyster and the timing. As soon as the temperature goes over 15 degrees, you have 1 hour after 15 degrees to get those oysters to a colder temperature. That's not very long. Below that, at 10 degrees, below the 15 degrees, you have 4 hours between 10 and 15. But that's still not a lot of time. I mean, when you think about a lot of oyster farmers, I mean, an hour out there getting to your plant or wherever you want to chill them down. So there's definitely there's a really good document, and I'll recommend it to. I'll keep repeating this, and I think it was the ANS put it out, and it's called A Practical Guide to the Control of Vibrio parahemolyticus in Oysters. I recommend that all the farmers get a chance to read it. I don't know if it's online. It may be, but it's certainly be a good. It's a good source. Now, why is it becoming worse? We've already talked on the fact that now we've started harvesting in the summertime. This was never done. The summer harvesting it's only since oyster farming has come of age, and now it's more than 3 months of the year, which is traditionally what it used to be, and why they didn't have problems before. I think the old adage of you don't eat oysters in the summer, I think some of it may have been due to the fact that the Vibrio was making people sick as well. It was probably a combination of that and diatoms, I suppose, with some of the diatom problems that happened in the summertime as well. But I'm sure there was a link in the old grandmother sayings that don't eat an oyster in the month with no R or whatever, and, you know. But there's probably something to that. So as I repeated earlier, it's not something that will kill you, but it will make you sick. It's very rare. The statistics showing that compared to a vulnificus, where they've had many, many, many deaths, this is not a beast that will just make you, unless you happen to have an immune deficiency or you've got a health condition that might put you at risk. It's similar. That was similar, if you remember, when domoic acid came along. There was a person that died, but he had a heart condition, right? So if you're not healthy, it might just put you over the edge. So I guess from a farming perspective, if you've made the decision that you are willing to take the risk to harvest oysters between June and September, which is when the water temperature is going to be over 15 degrees, then you have to accept the fact that you're going to be into a full-fledged monitoring program for Vibrio, because if it's required by CFIA that you do this. So one of the things that we don't have very much knowledge base in Nova Scotia specifically is how existent is it out there in a lot of the bays and inlets. Like I alluded to earlier, we may have had this for years and years, but we've never really looked for it. A lot of the time when I hear these firsts, I think it's just because it was a farmer that was producing something and then somebody got sick as a result of it, and then we find out that, yeah, it was there all along. But so sentinel oyster testing, that's something that the ANS is actively pursuing, so that they can look at a number of locations and determine what level of Vibrio is existing out there. So that maybe give you an area. If you're determining an area you want to grow oysters, you may want to avoid areas that are higher in level.
Robin, is there any, in terms of VP, is there any difference in analysis between bottom culture and suspended in terms of levels of VP, or is it just time, temperature, and water?
It really is. It's really more to do with the temperature than anything else. If the bottom is cooler, in some places you might get a thermocline where you've got 4 or 5 degree temperature difference between the top and the bottom. That could make a difference. But it's really going to be more to do with the temperature than it is anything else. Yeah. And when I talked about the 60 oysters, once you hit that 15 degrees, you have to send them off to the lab. And there's quite a regiment involved in that. And I'll show you, at the latter part of the talk, we'll show you the monitoring that you should be undertaking through the whole process. The timing is important. You have to catalog this whole thing so you can demonstrate clearly that they're not out of the water very long. They're never exposed to the sun and the heat. It goes back into temperature below 10 degrees within an hour if it's over 15. You have to have it timed. You should be taking, there's an instrument which it's mentioned in here. I don't have one, but it's they don't just want a water temperature. They want the internal meat temperature of the oyster. So this particular instrument, you can maybe Jeff's familiar with them. It's a probe, and it has to be calibratable. So you have to mention, I calibrated in such and such a date, then we did the temperature, and that should be in your records as well. And this probe goes in and it'll read the internal temperature, and you're not supposed to touch the shell if you can when you're inserting it into the mouth of the oyster. So that'd be a little tricky, I would say. I think you're probably looking at opening the oyster fully, really, to do it properly that way, which is a casualty, but but you've got to do it immediately. You can't wait, because even your hand can bring the temperature of an oyster up, right? Any source of heat. So, and once they determine that the levels, if they're zero, you're okay. Your bacterial levels are zero. But if they see indication, you're going every 2.5 degrees increase from that time. You're going to be right. You're going to have to keep sending samples because they want to know.
Now, Jeff might don't. I mean, I was at a oyster symposium over PEI a year ago, where they've been running a series of trials over the last number of years on different types of techniques to control the heat around oysters, whether it's that mesh that they were talking about with top boats, or whether it's and all that sort of stuff. And it's interesting, because that was number one, the first time I've heard about it, and I haven't heard much about it.
I have a little piece on that here.
Do you?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that information is gotten out as much as it should.
Yeah, I talked to the people, they are writing.
It's not finished yet, right?
I think it's finished, but it's not written up.
It's not written, yeah.
So
you're looking at about 60, you know, for this is approximately, you know, cost-wise. I was talking to Phil Docker, he says that's more like $150, that shipping charge, because you have to pack them in ice to make sure they're cold, you know, the way, and they have to be immediately, they got to be there within 24 hours, right? So, and it's in PEI, the lab, you know, so the whole timing is so crucial to this beast, because he's very sensitive to any temperature rises. So, so you know, it's a cost, and if you have to do this if you get at some level every 2.5 degrees, you could be looking at 5, 6 samples before you know, that gets expensive, right? That's well, we're at the end of this talk, we should probably talk about recommendations, right? What type of things do we need to help the industry, given this new arrival, and is there something that we can be provided? Because one thing I did find, that CFIA, I called them up to have a good discussion and tell me everything they knew. Of course, they just referred me to their website, and they basically don't really provide much information. They leave it up to the farmer. It's up to you under your QMP or your doc. You have to indicate that you're in control and that you're monitoring and that you're making sure that those oysters are staying below 10 degrees, and that's what you have to prove to them. As far as getting information on the parasite, or the bacteria, and it was like pulling teeth. You can't. They said, I'd like to help you, but I can't. If we had to do that for everybody, we're too short-staffed. So.
And is there not, at least there's an indication that there is going to be a new accredited lab in Halifax?
Yeah, well, there's, Nolan down, he's been working for over 2 years at this. Now, that's not going to something that happens, that's a long accreditation process, especially for CFIA's requirements. Yeah, so there may be one more, but we need more than one for sure to try and prove, from a timing perspective, to be able to get these things looked at quickly.
Robin, is this an Atlantic-wide program, like them to do it in?
It's CFIA program.
But is it Atlantic-wide? Is it?
Oh yes, it's not limited to Nova Scotia. So I would say your farmers would be doing, you know, undertaking the same process, because it's, you know, any that are harvesting in those warm months.
Well, and so the challenge is for the industry is that CFIA is only affecting processing plants for oysters. So if you're a cottage oyster farmer selling directly either to a consumer or directly to a restaurant, then you may never check your oysters. Big problem for the industry, because if oysters are flying off of or coming off of a farm that does that Vibrio going straight to a restaurant in Halifax, and somebody gets sick, it's the whole industry that gets sick.
Well, when this monitoring involves more than just you monitoring, looking for originally for the presence of it before you sell it, and then the temperatures and timing when it gets to the facility where it's going to be processed and shipped, but also in the retail end, they have to maintain temperatures below 5 degrees as well, and records are supposed to be kept to that effect in the summer as well. That's not, no, that's something that's a real education, right, because otherwise people could get sick, you know.
It is a huge education issue.
Yeah. We talked about the so this HACCP principle is really critical control points. It's this is really a key to the actual monitoring as well, really, so that certain things will tweak. Of course, you get your water temperatures. Water temperature hits a certain level, then you're going to want to you're going to have to take the next procedure, and you say And right through the whole process, the biggest problem is you've got multiple parties involved because you've got the processing plant, you've got the growers, and then you've also got the retailers because they're all dealing with the same product. As long as they realize that you don't leave them out on the shelf for for a few days after they get them buy them from the farmer, you know, they could still become a problem.
Well, to do that, Rob, I think one of the things that everyone should know is that after the publication of the practical guide for post-harvest handling that we produced last year, we met with the Restaurant Association.
Right.
And shared that with them as well.
Yes.
And because, you know, the farmer can do everything correctly, and all of a sudden it gets to a restaurant, sits on the back dock in the sun for, you know, 3 hours before they bring it into their cooler and all that.
And usually, rule of thumb is it's usually the farmer that gets blamed, I
Yeah,
find.
yeah.
So there's the information, which is important to know where the lab is and the phone numbers and stuff for that. And how you know, they seem to be a credible lab that's right presently the only one, but could be changing within the near future. The parasite doesn't kill the fish. It's just it just makes people sick when they eat it. It doesn't hurt the oyster any. It doesn't seem to. There's other ways. This is where I don't think our levels are such because probably our water temperatures, if we had year-round water temperatures, but a lot of the Vibrios you can get from wounds as well. You don't have to ingest the shellfish. You can actually, if you've got an open wound and you're swimming in an area where there's high levels, you can actually get Vibrio in your system that way. So that's one thing that CFIA had mentioned. And we all know that cooking not only destroys oysters, it destroys the bacteria, but it also destroys the pleasure of eating oysters. So that's why oysters and not mussels or all the other products that are cooked, because it's eaten raw generally. So see there are the statistics: 15% of people infected are hospitalized. So that's with hemolytica. Whereas it's
Is there a place in the oyster where it would be
concentrated. That is a question I can't answer, but I suspect the gut. But what do you think?
It's mainly digestive blend.
Yeah.
Because that's
It have to
what
be
is,
if it's
yeah.
cleared so quickly.
Okay.
It's in the digestive blend.
So it's not a surface, it's internal.
Well, it's absorbed with the food too, and that's why the antibody is a filter, and it does accumulate the bacteria in this system.
So this is the standard here that they'll be looking for. So no single unit will ever exceed 10,000 most probable number per gram. And if there's 100, well, they wanted to get it down to 50 is what they'd like to get it down to. So that's sort of the tweaking level from, I guess if you call critical control point, that would be certainly a critical control point when the levels go over that to send the alarm bells. Below, okay, that's below, sorry, that's my printing. But anyway, not detectable below 10, we've said that. And it's thought to overwinter in the sediments, okay. So this business of how you can reduce the levels, there are a number of different options to do this, I guess. It's all related to water temperature or temperature. Whether it's water temperature or the PEI is actually, I've got a little thing that show you, they've done some studies where they've actually placed oysters that have got a known amount of Vibrio, and they put them in the hot sun in the back of a pickup, so the levels went through the roof after a day or two, and then they put them back in the water, and they found over 7 days it was a huge decline. You know, it just went down to the point where in 7 days they were virtually edible. So, you know, that's how long, it was only a short time frame. But that study will be available soon from the sound of what, it hasn't been published yet, but it's going to be available soon. So everything is to do with temperature with these things. And I don't know if most farmers have kept recording thermometers on their leases. I do, but I've just been doing it for years. You buy the little hobo temps for about $35 and they last for a year. They're a good little unit, and they will give you an idea of what your temperature regimes are, so you know when the risk times are, when your temperatures hit the 15. It's a good idea to have track of that.
I was told by some farmers that it's not only the temperature. Sometimes the temperature in the water will be quite high, but somehow Vibrio is not there. It might be more complicated than just the temperature, but it could be some environmental.
I'm sure we're just learning about this, but this all I've got is the information that's available to this point, and everything seems to come back to temperature. That's what CFIA are certainly focusing on right now. But yeah, I'm sure there could be. But there's when I looked at the tables that they had in here, they show that you know, if you go from 10 degrees to 25 degrees, it's almost 30 times faster that it grows. You know, so it's really temperature related in terms of how, once it's there. Maybe when it's not there to start with, that doesn't matter. The temperature can go high, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot more work done on this yet. Okay. That's another, yeah. So if you're a farmer, it all depends how you're growing your oysters, I guess. If you've got a problem and you've got several leases, maybe you've got leases that are cooler that you can move them to. That's possible. If you've got 4 or 5 degrees, it can make a huge difference. It's often not that easy to find that big a temperature differential, but it could be a management tool. If you go down deeper, you're going to get, if you have access to colder water. I know in some areas, if you have 30, 40 feet, there's not many people that have that, but you could put them down there. If you have a suspended, you might gain, you know, or lose temperature and be able to handle them that way. Because from everything I asked the question to PEI, can you just put them in a refrigerator and monitor the levels going down? Most of the work they'd done was putting them in the water, in cooler water, and bringing it down. So refrigerated water. Well, refrigerated water is not accessible to too many people, right? It's so you're somewhat limited where you can do that. So I think it would be quite useful to know where actual dry storage with levels would help a farmer, you know, achieve levels as well that are safe to eat. Well, that's the document that I suggest you call. Calibratable temperature probes. So this is the device that was recommended in the ANS document. I don't know if it was Peter or somebody. It goes for about $65. If you need the information, that's there. I don't have one, so I can't. But to calibrate, to calibrate them is very simple. You just put them in a slurry of ice water and if they don't read 0 after, then you're definitely not. You know, if you're reading +4, or you're reading something other than 0, you've got a problem with it. So they have to be calibratable. That's from the CFIA's perspective. Well, these show up a little clearer. Okay. So there's 3 different records. This is the harvest record. So you've got the harvest date, harvest time. So you want to know what day it is, harvest area, your lease, open or closed area, whether it's air temperature, internal tissue temperature. This is where water temperature. So you want the water temperature and the internal temperature to see if there's a difference. And then how long is the cooling time and the cooling temperature. So all this stuff has to be kept record of, right? So there's.
When you're taking water temperature, is it a high tide, low tide, and is it?
Well, they say that may be that can be a bit of a management tool there, because usually at a high tide your temperatures are a little lower, right? So maybe that would be the time that you might want to do your harvesting too. When the tides are higher, when the temperatures are
You
cool.
always take the temperature at the same place where you.
Yeah, it's with the same tides every day. Every time you do it, it takes the same location, so you don't.
Or at the bottom, take the temperature at the bottom.
Temperature on the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's consistent. So they have a consistency. So there's your. Well, that's just showing a recorded data log of water temperature. I think in that case, I think something like those recording thermometers would probably be just as good myself, because that's not meat temperature, that's water temperature, and to me, I think they're within 1/10 of a degree, so they're pretty accurate. And there's Vibrio harvest to receiving. So this is after you've taken them out of the water and they're going to the plant. So they want to know how long is it, because you're supposed to be only allowed 1 hour, right, to get them to a place. Well, you get them chilled and then you get them to a plant. So they want to know the whole history of what that animal's going through to make sure he's never been exposed to a warmer regime. So they say using crushed ice is fine, that's probably the cheapest way to keep it cold. You're not going to probably have a refrigerated cooler when you're putting them in, so crushed ice would work. But those are things that, how many oyster farmers were doing this years ago? Not many, were there? I can't think of many people using crushed ice to send their product. So these forms are important, and they should be part of your monitoring program for the Vibrio. That should be. Where's that other? I want to bring that other one up. Is that one here? I had the one from PEI on here too.
Press stop.
Sorry, yeah.